welcome back to the madness. My name is Erin, and today we're covering a book called Beyond That, the Sea, a novel where we spend a majority of our time talking about the events of the story after the fact. This is a novel for people with an edging kink because all it does is bring you right up to the good stuff, but you never get satisfied. If you ever wanted a novel that is just a series of phone calls and conversations over tea about events that were merely fades to black, then this is the novel for you. If you own an Ashley Madison account, then this is the novel for you. If you like the idea of having a sibling dynamic evolve into sexual partners, but it's okay because they're not actually siblings, or you're a really big fan of the Mortal Instruments, then this is a novel for you. Did I mention that this book takes place during World War II? It's very easy to forget there's a war going on when the found sibling dynamic jumps the shark into Cassandra Clarish waters. This is everything you need to know about Beyond That, the Sea. Enjoy the show. That was a clap. So this is Lara Spence Ash's debut novel, and she is definitely the more business and educational side of writing. She works for a university. She's the founding editor of a literary journal called Craft, which I couldn't imagine would ever accept my work, given that I am about to put the critical in critical analysis for this book. Other than that, not much information about her. Does knowing this is a debut novel change the way I see her? Yes. Writing a novel is hard, and I can feel more forgiving to someone who's starting out versus someone like Stephen King, who's had a decade and millions of dollars to perfect his craft. And ultimately, this is art, and art is a matter of taste, and I'm not among the crowd when it comes to this novel. This novel has a 4.2 rating on Goodreads as of writing this, with over 50,000 ratings. People love this book. I do not, okay? I really like World War II as a time period to study, and so this is where my area of knowledge is. I know a bunch of random lore about World War II, and so, this novel drove me insane. It actually drove me mad. As always, let's break down the novel concept. We'll read the synopsis that, much like the polar ice caps are slowly being melted out of society, much to the misery of literally everyone everywhere. I just bought a book, a paperback, and where there's no inside sleeve to read, and it's just blurbs on the back, and I'm like, girl, how are we gonna know what's in this novel? There's no synopsis. Anyways, to the synopsis. A sweeping, tender-hearted love story, Beyond That, the Sea, by Lara Spence Ash, tells the story of two families living through World War II on opposite sides of the Atlantic Ocean, and the shy, irresistible young woman who will call them both her own. As German bombs fall over London in 1940, working-class parents Millie and Reginald Thompson make an impossible choice. They decide to send their 11-year-old daughter, Beatrix, to America. There, she'll live with another family for the duration of the war, where they hope she'll stay safe. Scared and angry, feeling lonely and displaced, Bea arrives in Boston to meet the Gregory's, Mr. and Mrs. G, and their son, William and Gerald. They fold Bea seamlessly into their world. She becomes part of this lively family, learning their ways and their stories, adjusting to their affluent lifestyle. Bea grows close to both boys, one older, one younger, and fills the gap between them. Before she even realizes it, life with the Gregorys feels more natural to her than the quiet, spare life she had with her own parents back in England. As Bea comes into herself and relaxes into her new life, summers on the coast of Maine, new friends clamoring to hear about life across the sea, the girl she had been begins to fade away, until abruptly she's called home to London when the war ends. Desperate as she is not to leave this life behind, Bea dutifully retraces her trip across the Atlantic back to her new old world. As she returns to post-war London, the memory of her American family stays with her, never fully letting go, and always pulling her heart as she tries to move on and pursue love and a life of her own. As we follow Bea over time, navigating between her two worlds, Beyond That, the Sea emerges as a beautifully written, absorbing novel full of grace and heartache, forgiveness and understanding, loss and love. Everything about this is accurate up until we get to the sentence, her new friends who are clamoring to hear about her life across the sea. Because Bea has friends technically, but none of them are that important except for her foster brothers Gerald and William. Bea returning from Boston back to London is about the midpoint of the novel. She returns when she's about 14 or 15, and when she arrives back in London, we time jump to when she's 21 and has a full-time job. So I am reticent to agree that this book has anything to do with Bea navigating the two worlds, because she is so unwaveringly in a single world of her life of Boston. Her reintegration into London is so irrelevant, we don't bother covering it. The story picks up right when someone from the Boston family interacts with Beatrix for the first time in person since the war. The pursuit of love and a life of her own is just not in the book, because the book so clearly knows where it's going with which results in everyone being forced to put up with all of this pond yarning. Something else that irks me about the novel concept is that it makes it sound like the transition from America back to England is where the majority of this story's heartbeat is, and that's just not the case. Everything after Bea returns to London feels like a high schooler recreating scenes from a SparkNotes summary. It's also weird to call it a love story. I can't tell you about it yet, but just remember, it's weird. This synopsis ultimately oversells. This novel centers the romance, and it's really obvious that everything else, including World War II itself, is secondary. The book has a nice and professional cover, okay? It's nice, it's professional, but it's not original. This cover depicts a young woman with short brown hair, and in what I hope is period-accurate World War II blossom skirt, standing on a rocky shore with her back to us, looking out to the water, and in the sky 2 airplanes are flying, and the entire title is in lowercase. What is unoriginal about this cover? You are asking. I will answer. It's the aesthetic of a woman with her back to the camera. It's everywhere in fiction. So much that when I go to bookstores, I play Spot the Woman while we browse for books, and we see just how many books we can find with a woman her back to the viewer. I do feel like it happens more in historical fiction, but like it is in every genre. Now, before everyone gets tilted about this, I can admit that this is a preference because art is a matter of taste, and a book with this imagery isn't going to make me hesitate because, like I said, it's a nice and professional cover. I am just not shocked that we're here. The only thing wrong about this image is the woman does not look like Beatrix. Beatrix is known for having really long hair. It's a notable plot point when her hair is cut, and that woman's hair is mid-length at best. If you're gonna hit me with the classic woman facing away from the camera, at least make her accurate to the character, please and thank you. Let's talk about titles. Beyond That the Sea is a great title for what I feel is ultimately a mediocre book. It is lifted from a line in the book, and it references the Atlantic Ocean, which is between America and Europe. The pond, if you will. Beatrix is often looking out at the water, imagining her parents on the other side, wondering what's going on over there. It's evocative and fairly indivisible from the book. And I suppose that there's this thematic connection that Beatrix is permanently divided by the Atlantic Ocean. She's always looking out to sea, imagining the family on the other side. When she's in America, she's imagining her parents in England, and when she's in England, she's always thinking about her family in America. I really do like it as a title. I just wish the novel was good! I am cursed that the best titles always go to the most mediocre novels. Okay, hear me out. I don't know how I feel about calling this historical fiction. Okay, you know the Bechdel test? It's a test that observes female representation in movies by measuring how many female characters with names talk to each other about anything but a man. Well, now you know what the Bechdel test is. And anyways, there are some movies that pass this test by the skin of their teeth. It's movies where there's like 2 women with minimal time on screen who barely have a name, who only pass because they have 1, maybe 2 lines of dialogue that isn't about a man. This book, being called historical fiction, feels like that kind of a movie where it just barely passes. The classification element for historical fiction is that it must be a book set in a time period of the past that is identifiable through things like historical events, landmarks, and culture, and despite this novel being about the American home front, the American home front isn't really represented. So, like, why write a book during this time period? That's the question I will be asking throughout the entirety of this episode. Why World War II? Why wasn't this just a piece of contemporary fiction? Why did we make these choices? I've also struggled how to articulate this next problem that I've noticed, and I've rewritten this a dozen times, so I'm just gonna keep it as simple as possible because I'm really not the intended voice for this kind of topic. There's no black people in this novel, and that makes me uncomfortable. And I'm not talking, there are no named black characters. I am talking about the whole demographic. And look, I'm gonna level with you. I am not demanding racism. But segregation did exist in the 1940s, and it feels weird to tell a story about the strange situation of living in America in the 1940s, having to learn its culture and acclimate to it. To have this aspect redacted, it feels like an entire demographic has been erased from America. Laura Spence Ash choosing not to have any commentary of Black history in her story of what 1940s America looked like is itself a commentary. Her choice to say nothing still means something. And you could argue that it wasn't relevant, but how could it not? If the novel is about the two distinct worlds, that of England and that of America, wouldn't the nuances of race be important? How many of you knew that England didn't have any segregation laws in the 1940s, but also no laws that protected people from segregation? That's an interesting nuance that this novel could have touched on. But this novel, despite wanting to be this compare-contrast of America and England, according to Beatrix, doesn't really do that at all, because there's almost nothing unique about America and England. If you took World War II out, the representation of these two countries wouldn't change that much, which shouldn't be happening. I am not the person to talk about how to include minorities in your historical fiction, unless you want to know about the very specific time period of mostly Irish American Catholics being treated as second-class citizens in America. That I can talk about. What I can say is this: what is worse? To be uncomfortable writing in some ugly parts of your historical fiction era, or pretending the ugly parts didn't happen at all? If you can't handle writing about the parts that make you uncomfortable, then you really shouldn't be writing historical fiction. A problem that plagues minority representation is the idea of the minorities in the state of eternal suffering, that their stories are often in the context of their oppressions, resulting in a distinct lack of joy. And joy has always existed, even in time periods where it feels like there couldn't possibly be joy. Another problem is that minority stories written by minorities aren't pushed as hard as their non-minority counterparts, and as a result, it feels like minorities are just missing from historical fiction all the time. Where are they? Why is this happening? And what can we do about it? At the end of this episode, I will talk about a potential avenue to include Black history in this specific story without it being about Black suffering. Because I'm really not trying to say I want Black people to suffer through segregation in this novel for the sake of historical accuracy. I just don't like this novel feels like Black people don't exist at all. I don't like that, and neither should you. Alrighty, that was some heavy ethics right there, but congratulations, you've made it to intermission. Go get a snack, go use the bathroom. This is a critical literary analysis of Beyond That the Sea. Not only will this book be spoiled, but it will be spoiled in great detail, so if you'd like to read this book without being majorly spoiled, now is the time to jump ship and come back when you've read it. But if you're too impatient and, well, you started this video already, so you might as well finish it, then welcome to the point of no return. I didn't think I'd need to talk about onomastics today, but Beatrix's name does hold some narrative significance. It's real simple. It'll be quick. First of all, her name means something along the lines of good traveler, and she makes these journeys across the water. She's literally a traveler. I get it. The narrative parts are in her nicknames. In America, her foster brothers call her Bea, but in home in England, she's Trixie because her mom didn't like Bea as a nickname, so instead she just insisted on calling her Beatrix. This is ultimately a non-issue, but when her foster brother William finds out that in England she has a different name, he takes it personally. You'd have thought this man got shot with how he reacted to it, and Bea tells him to call her Bea, and he calls her Trixie anyways, and it just feels like this dude grabbed a shovel and made a hill just so that he could die on it. Like, William, get a life. Alright, let's talk about characters. There's 8 main narrators, and then I think there's only one minor character worth talking about named Rose. I'm pretty sure everyone else who's important is a narrator, or they exist in the context of 30 seconds and act more as like filler for the void rather than having any real significance at all, which is a shame because I love minor characters so much, but the minor characters aside from Rose really don't do anything. And I think Rose is actually, no, yeah, she's a narrator too, so she's a minor character, but she's also still a narrator. I think Spence Ash is good at writing complicated characters. Everyone here is dynamic and complex, with flaws, creating unique tensions between characters. The issue ultimately is that there's nothing for these characters to do, resulting in the issue where they talk to each other, get mad about something, make up, start the process all over again. This becomes more apparent in the latter half of the novel. Reginald is Bea's father, and he's the one who decides to send Bea to London, but he's a jackass, and lets Bea think that it was her mother who insisted upon this. This man let his wife take the fall for the most traumatic experience in his daughter's life up to this point, and Millie, the wife, does not handle Bea being gone well, and instead of being there for his wife, he does everything he can to avoid being around her, including joining the ARP wardens. But even then, he pretends to be on the clock all the time, when in reality, he's just getting drunk with his buddies to avoid his wife, who's upset that he shipped his daughter off to America. This is frustrating, because this is like the only unique piece about world building that grounds us into World War II, is the fact that he is a part of the ARP. ARP stands for Air Raid Precautions. But it isn't actually about him being in the ARP. We don't actually really learn anything about this organization. It's really just about how he hates his wife and is using it as an excuse to avoid her. Like, he's like, I want to help, but, like, it's real convenient that, like, I could just avoid my wife. As a result, we don't learn anything beyond, like, really surface level stuff, and I don't know. Why are we telling a story about World War II if we're not focusing on anything World War II related in a detailed and meaningful way? What is the point? Why did we write this in World War II? Anyways, on top of avoiding his wife, Reginald starts playing chess through the mail with Ethan Gregory, Bee's foster father. So he's out drinking, out on patrol, writing letters to a man across the sea, not being near his wife when she is at her lowest. Dude's priorities are about as straight as me. Like, I hate this man. Just like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, I love this all as characterization. This is good writing. He's so vexing. He is the worst. Poor Millie, Bea's mother. The worst part of Reg not correcting Bea is that Bea and Millie's relationships was already on the fritz, and this just made it so much worse. Bea leaves England thinking her heartless mother sent her across the sea and her dad is just hapless victim being toted along. It's so depressing because Millie loves her daughter so much. You can feel it in every moment of her narrative. Her grief is overwhelming. It's really just not fair. Millie does become somewhat antagonistic when Bea returns, and I get it. Like, I don't condone Millie's actions, but if you'd been there and you'd have seen it, I bet you would have done the same. She wants to pretend the Gregorys just didn't exist. That's Bea's foster family. And Bea's 5-year stint across the pond never happened because it was traumatic for Millie. Not just the war and her man-child husband, but the separation from her daughter. I know what it's like to have someone like that in your life because it happened to me. I was forcibly separated from a family member, and at reunification, it was difficult for them to talk about the events of that separation, which was at odds with me because I wanted to know all of the missing parts of the story. It was only years later in high school that answers finally came. And like to this day, they're in a space where they have the privilege of erasing this event from their personal history, but much like B, that part of my life is a ghost in the narrative. It's never going away. I've allowed foster care to be a public part of my history because pretending it didn't happen isn't going to change the fact that I'm an entirely different person than the girl who existed before foster care. The difference is so stark that it feels like two separate people. Millie feels like she's always been that same Millie, but Bea is having the same experience that I had. She is a completely different person. She is a familiar stranger in her mother's eyes. I think when traumatic events happen, there is this desire to just return to the time before it all went wrong. Erase all the bad and just start when the last time it was good. But it's never that simple. Millie just wants to reset, back before Bea went to America, only this time, no war! But the reality is that the whole galaxy spins and rotates, and we, as humans, never truly occupy the same spaces we once occupied in the past because they've been left behind amongst the space dust. There's no resetting, no pretending. You have to let the things that already happened to you be a part of you because they already are. I did not mean to get philosophical and gushy. Let's keep moving forward. I feel a lot of empathy for Millie, despite her villainous qualities in the second part of the book. I understand why she crashes out, okay? Everyone else, fuck all these other guys, I understand why Millie crashes out. We've already talked about how the genre of this book falls a little flat as historical fiction. The exception is Millie. She's the only character where it feels like the war is going on because she is so affected by it. It's so distant from everyone else, and that's a result of the mediocre world building, but for Millie, it is overwhelmingly present and pretty well done. But that's not good that I only feel about that for one of 8 main characters. Ethan Gregory is Bea's foster dad, and he's the all-American professor dad. He's so nervous about having a foster daughter because he does not know how to parent a girl. His anxiety is adorable. He clearly wants to do what's best for Bea. He just totally clueless on how to proceed. He was initially against fostering a Briton, but his wife convinced him, and he ends up loving Bea like any parent would. There's this scene where he teaches her how to swim so that Bea can swim from the private island to the shore of Maine. It's very, very cute. There isn't much to say about Ethan. He plays chess with Reg, which we've already covered, but he later will play chess with both Millie and Beatrix through the mail. And for some reason, everyone acts like someone pulled a gun when they find out who Ethan is playing male chess with. Like, for a moment, they act like someone secretly sending letters about chess moves is this big secret or betrayal. The only person who gets to be mad about this is Millie when she finds out Reg was doing it because she's traumatized about losing her daughter and is all alone, and Reginald is sending goddamn love letters to his pen pal across the pond. I'd kill him. He had it coming. Nancy is Millie's foster mom, and she's a sweetheart. She's excited to have a foster daughter because she never wanted to be just a boy mom, but, like, in a very normal way that parents might feel when a baby isn't the gender they wanted. I know some parents get weird about it, but this is, like, normal. Nancy loves her kids. Bea doesn't create a schism of attention among the siblings. You can tell Nancy loves them all the same. The one weird thing she does with Bea is her bath time. Bea insists that Nancy helps her with bath time, given the option, but at one point, Ethan points out how Bea is getting older, and it risks becoming weird because Bea is not her child, and Nancy freaks out and says bath time is their special time. Look, lady, it was fine until you said it like that. Bea clearly felt some comfort of not having to take a bath alone, and you provided that, but saying it's your special time makes it feel like you're not allowed within 500 feet of a school. They do eventually stop the ritual, and it's not seen as a big deal. It's something Bea just grows out of. Like, it's really not that big of a deal. It's just fucking weird when she says it like that. So this novel spans from, like, childhood to adulthood, and when we get to the adulthood part of the kids' lives, that's where we learn, like, William, the foster brother, marries a girl named Rose, and Nancy does not like that Rose is Catholic. There is more anti-Catholic sentiments in this novel than anti-Jewish, Black, or Japanese, you know? The three main demographics being othered so famously that everyone knows about it, or being othered specifically in the United States where Nancy lives. Anti-Catholic sentiments are accurate to the time because it's happened since the inception of our country, and I mean that literally. Like, some of the people that were fleeing England for, like, religious reasons were mad that the Church of England was too close to Catholicism, which probably would have made Henry VIII roll in his grave if he heard that. Anyways, so, like, while this isn't technically inaccurate, I just feel like anti-Catholic sentiments were not a part of the cultural moment of the 40s and 50s. I don't feel like it's the moment, okay? And here's the thing. It is a safe bigotry because it's Catholicism, and while Catholics are othered within Christian communities, this doesn't really happen outside of these communities. Catholics were treated like second-class citizens in the historical United States, and there were laws that tried to prevent their practices, but none of those exist today anymore. And you'd really only know about this stuff if you've studied America's relationship with Catholicism, or if you belong to a Protestant church that actively teaches Catholic hate, which does happen, but it's not common. It's pretty rare. I think I've encountered 2 churches in my entire lifetime that have acted like that. Like, it's not that common. And while I am talking about Catholic oppression in the United States, this is a disclaimer that it's no longer happening in the modern day, and I'm not trying to say that Catholics were secretly the victims the entire time. They have a long rap sheet of unspeakable harm committed in the United States, just like every other Christian denomination, okay? So when I say it's a safe bigotry, I mean that no one really thinks about anti-Catholicness as bigotry in the way we see anti-Semitism as bigotry. And bigotry is just the complete intolerance of someone's beliefs that are different from your own. But there's a difference between intolerance and criticism. A lot of pushback against Christianity, Catholics included, is often criticism. People aren't intolerant, they're just upset about hypocrisy and bad stuff that they might be doing. Bigotry would be getting mad that someone's getting a Catholic funeral because they don't worship God correctly, which is what happens in this book. I'm really going hard on something that isn't that important to the plot. It just shocked me that out of nowhere, Nancy is Catholic intolerant, and I wouldn't say that this is inaccurate, because again, the ideology still exists today. I'm Catholic, I see it occasionally, and this just brings us back to the problem with how shallow the world building is, and how weird that of all the bigotry that existed, like, from the 1940s to the 1960s, Catholicism is the only thing that's covered. And, like, the worst part is that JFK caused a moral panic because he was Catholic, and that's not in the book. So, like, this book isn't actually doing anything with this anti-Catholic sentiment. I think it's just a quirk the writer gave to Nancy without realizing how much history is actually behind it, because everyone treats this trait of Nancy's the same way they treat someone who isn't a morning person. Like, ugh, she'll get over it kind of stuff. And this isn't what the novel is about, which brings us back to our other problem, that all of the historical context that helps build the world of this particular book doesn't seem to have anything to do with what this novel wants to be about. They're just, like, side things, like little fun details, and it's like, no, like, can we focus on these? Speaking of William's Catholic wife, let's talk about Will. He's the older foster brother, and he's very direct, prone to anger kind of guy. He's easily frustrated, gets annoyed at his little brother, spends the majority of his teenage years being an absolute menace. Beatrix and William were close when she first arrived. There is a point where they seem like on 2 separate paths, because William is such an asshole at times. And at one point, Bea thinks of writing her mom to ask to go home early because he is that vexing. William is an interesting character. He's so self-centered and takes everything personally and is generally unpleasant to be around. He wants to join the army to go fight in Germany, but the war ends before he can sign up for the military. But just think how different this plot could have been if lying had been invented in the 1940s. Jokes aside, this is another missed opportunity to highlight anything interesting that happened during World War II. It's a well-known thing that a lot of men lied about their age in order to join the army, and this isn't unique to World War II. My school brought in a Vietnam War veteran to talk about the war to us, and he told us that he was 16 when he joined. He told the recruiter he was 16, and the recruiter told him he was too young and to walk around the block and think about it, so he walked the block, went back in, told the recruiter he was 18, and he was let into the army. So, William just could have lied. And the worst part of Will's character is that he's in love with Beatrix, but when their relationship ends, he moves on with a wife and a kid on the way, but that does not stop him from, being in love with Beatrix, and it's his wife Rose who suffers the most. It's not her fault. She married a man who's in love with his foster sister. Rose cannot catch a break, I swear. Gerald is the younger foster brother, and he wears his heart on his sleeve. He's kind, he's sensitive, he loves to laugh and play games, and is very different from his older brother. He's also in love with Beatrix, because of course he is. This is a rom-com in a historical fiction's trench coat. Gerald often feels like he, as a younger sibling, he's left out, especially when, Beatrix and William's relationships tighten and then eventually become romantic. We don't see much of him in his adult years. He moves to California and struggles with romantic relationships. He does have one girlfriend, I think her name is Linda, but she really isn't that important. He does end up renting a house to a bunch of college students, but they only exist for one scene, so I guess he's living a life, but it's really never, we don't really focus on it a lot. Beatrix is our main character, despite the ensemble cast. This story is about her. She's ripped from her old life, put on a boat for her safety. She wasn't poor, but not middle class either, and now thrown into an uptown life that she could never imagine. Bea is a smart girl who is generally at the top of her class. She has a fierce determination about her, and a lot of her story is the uncomfortable feeling she has of living this quiet life while the war rages on, She's summering out to Maine on this private island while her parents are in raid shelters, and there's this dissonance that she has to contend with. There's also, this very interesting turning point after Pearl Harbor is bombed, that all of her classmates are suddenly interested in her because she's lived during the air raids of London, and these kids are beginning to worry about air raids themselves. She's the closest thing to an expert these kids have, and they're hoping she can teach them something. It's sad, but, it's really interesting. It's one of the few times we really feel the war affecting America, but it's, the only time that it happens, which is so insane. In her adulthood, Bea ends up being a preschool teacher in London, and much like Gerald struggles immensely with ways of love, there's occasional boyfriends here and there, but they don't really last, and they're really not that important. The ex-partners in the main cast are just there to fill space. Something interesting about her in adulthood is she realizes she feels more American than she feels Britain because all of her favorites are from America. There's this whole bit where she's I don't know the rules of cricket, which is a very popular sport in England, and she uses this as an example as to why she feels like a diaspora in her own country. And while I can understand this, I don't know how real it feels that this 5-year period of her life had, such an impact that she's I'm an American. Everything I like is American, and it's all American, and I don't know how to play cricket. It's you could have learned the rules of cricket at any point in time moving back to London. It was just 5 years. This is the problem with the surface-level world building. Bea feels more connected to her time in America because there's nothing really about British culture in this book besides, cricket. And I'm gonna be honest, the things that Bea lists among her favorites as an American aren't really things we see her doing often. She's I like going to baseball games, and I really like your mom's blueberry muffins. And it's these don't play a thematic role in the story, and also, blueberry muffins are not, quintessential American culture. It's just you had blueberry muffins that happen to be made by someone who just happens to be American. I just don't understand where she's just I feel like I'm American in my soul. Rose is our one minor character, and she can't stop catching strays. She's Catholic, and she's married to William, and her mother-in-law hates that Rose is Catholic. Williams is still in love with Beatrix, cheats on Rose with her, and their relationship has fallen into such disrepair that they have these planned days where they do something away from each other, and the whole family thinks that they go on these really cute date nights. And they don't talk about what they do on these date nights. Like, I think Rose mentions that, like, she used to, like, going to the bars and get felt up by men and things like that because William literally doesn't care about her, but then she, like, she is so depressed at this that she just, like, stays home and takes long, warm baths and kind of hopes that William will have sex with her because he seems like to be more in the mood to have sex with her once they spend a full 24 hours away from each other. And it's just not fair that she's roped into this story where her husband is making heart eyes at his foster sister. Be a man and divorce Rose. Someone save this woman. I should also say here that Beatrix and William become unlikable the moment they cheat. Like, I don't actually care about Beatrix beyond that point because it feels like the cheating is justified because they're so in love with each other. Neither of them get caught. It's not a deal breaker for Gerald when he learns Beatrix knowingly cheated with William on his wife. It's fine because love is just so important, and William clearly doesn't love his wife the way he loves this girl he knew once. It's disgusting. I'm sorry. I don't like stories about cheaters where it's justified because they're soulmates or whatever. So the cool thing about this novel is it's got 8 narrators. I think it's actually 9. Who knows, who's counting? And it's interesting to see the way this book uses dramatic irony. Nancy buys Beatrix a dress because she's going to an upper-class Christmas party and loans her a string of pearls, and Millie, upon seeing the picture, thinks Beatrix is living in this rich house with rich people who buy her pearls. Millie and Reginald's perspectives are the strongest in this regard because Millie, she's just depressed about her daughter and her husband being torn away from her from the war, and then on Reginald's side, it's like, I lie to get out of the house because I can't stand being around my wife because she's so sad all the time. As much as I'm lambasting Reginald for doing this, I do like this as a character trait. I will just take every opportunity to make fun of him for it. Imagine getting upset that your wife is sad during World War II. I think the narrators, the large cast of narrators works fine enough for the story, especially because the characterization of the novel is the strongest point. That's the thing that makes this novel bearable. We do lose this in the latter half of the novel, eventually being reduced to just Beatrix and Gerald, which is also why I think the purpose of this novel was actually the romance, and it's not much deeper than that. Like, a couple narrators also die, so, there's that too. But, the voice is pretty great. I'm a big fan of the voice and the way that the narrators were used. Now, let's talk about how this book was structured. So, this story is told in 2 parts, B in America, B in England. B in America is the strongest part of the novel. We're in scene more often, we see B actually doing things as opposed to just talking about them. We're still missing anything concrete about the American Homefront, but we've already covered that. Then there's B in England. This is a highlight reel that only focuses on the 2 families' lives in the context of how they will ultimately interact with each other once again. The strongest part of this section is Millie, and the way that she struggles to be her daughter's mother again, making some fairly big mistakes along the way and nearly ruining their relationship more than once. It's difficult and complex, but Mia and Beatrix are the best part of the latter half of the novel, but the reality is, the majority of the latter half of the novel is just conversations. Nothing's actually happening. I was shocked when B was put on the ship back to London and we cut to 5 years later. We don't get to see B's adaptation back into the London life. It's already happened and we're going to be told about it in snippets. That's the moment where the heart of this novel collapsed in on itself. We've been building up to this moment and we literally press skip cutscene. This will keep happening. I don't think we get Ethan's funeral, Millie's wedding, a myriad of other events. We just fade to black and the scene opens to the aftermath conversation, and that's boring. I'm sorry, but it's boring. I want to know what it was like for Bee to be back in England without her father and a new stepfather. How did she acclimate back? We don't know. It's like the author gave up writing the second half of the novel. All of the jumps through time also contribute to the feeling that this novel is about their romance and literally nothing else, because all the jumps are pushing us into the plot lines that contribute to the eventual marriage of Beatrix and Gerald. Which, yeah, Beatrix marries Gerald. Hold on, we'll get there. I think that's why a lot of Millie and Beatrix's scenes together were the most interesting, because we weren't circling back to this weird marriage plot. There's a rough transition from that's my foster brother to that's my husband, let me tell you. It also just feels like it's no longer a historical fiction novel in the second half of the book, with the exception of Rose talking about Jackie Kennedy. I mean, this novel feels detached from World War II outside of Millie, but, like, once the war is over, it feels like the author forgot that this was historical fiction. The poor structure of this novel and the choice to leave out what I would think is the heart of the novel is what makes it mediocre, in my opinion. I feel like I'm feasting on good and great nothing, all for the sake of hooking Beatrix and Gerald up. That's the end goal, guys. That's what it is. So you know the basics of the plot already. I've been giving you snippets here and there. Let's get into some more details. The ultimate decision to send Bea to America was the scene where Reginald saw Beatrix reading the manual about poison gas, and she was caught playing constantly in her gas mask because she was afraid of dying in some kind of like poison gas event. That is a really haunting image that would be a reality check for any parent. I think this is a great parallel to when William joins the watch for air raids, that he himself has taken upon the worries of the war in the same way that Beatrix had. I think it would have been better if William's desire to watch the skies was just him processing the fact that he was at war in the way that Beatrix was with the gas mask. But William enlists to watch, like, either through the school or through the town, and it's so far removed of how that actually happened. Like, they just put a kid on top of the school and told them to watch? What is that going to accomplish? I feel it's so insulting to the Aircraft Warning Service, which was a civilian branch of the Military Grounds Observance Corps. It was mostly made up of men and women deemed ineligible to fight and required training to be a part of, but in this book it's just some 16-year-old standing on a roof and no girls are allowed. That's a literal thing William tells Beatrix, which, if this is supposed to be inspired by the AWS, it's not true because men and women were both in this branch of the military. I did more research fact-checking this episode than the author did writing this book. It's so frustrating. And as I've said, a majority of this book is about their vacations to this island the family owns in Maine where Beatrix learned how to swim. When we pan back to Millie and Reginald, it's how they're helping in the war efforts by doing things like joining the air raid precautions or the ARP and the ambulance driving. But again, that's also mostly about how Reg hates being around Millie, because God forbid a woman be upset that her daughter's been displaced. The first big shake of the plot is when Reginald dies of a heart attack. This death didn't, irk me at first, because I think it's just some cool twist of fate that it wasn't the war that killed Reg, but just something completely ordinary. And I really thought that Beatrix was gonna get pulled from America early back to London because Millie wanted her daughter back so bad, and I was really disappointed that didn't happen because I think that would have been interesting. Before Reginald died, there's also this moment where Millie's mom wants to pay for Millie to go see her daughter, and Millie chooses not to out of fear of not making it back to America, which I can understand, but again, that would have also been interesting. I think it would have been a cool narrative direction if Millie dies on the return trip back from seeing her daughter, leaving Reginald all alone with the choices he made. I love Millie, but Reginald creating the situation in which Millie feels she has to go see her daughter because she feels so abandoned in London would have been something Reginald had to live with the rest of his life. How does he tell his daughter that he might have been the reason Millie ended up on that boat? How does Beatrix learn to forgive him? But we don't get any of that. It's fine. I just wish we had more. I just wish the war was more important than just, the inciting incident of this plot. I just wish the war mattered. Beatrix and William, at the end of the first section, start having a sexual relationship, and, right before she goes home, she breaks it off, saying that, the long-distance thing ain't gonna work. And she's right. It's not the modern day. Everyone's had a click away. This is just not feasible. And then she, goes home to London. Millie remarries before Beatrix comes home. Beatrix does not react well to this, especially because she knows she's going home to an unfamiliar apartment with this new man, but as I've said before, we don't actually get to see Bea in this environment because we skipped right past it. The rest of this novel is Millie having a myriad of husbands and boyfriends, never quite getting it right. She's kind of a problem on purpose, and I can live with that. I stan Millie. The major plot beat that reunites the Gregorys and the Thompsons is the death of Ethan Gregory, William's father, Bea's foster father. You guessed it, a heart attack! By the second heart attack, I'm like, okay, people just be dying for the plot, nothing for the plot. Wonderful. And this is what pushes William back into Beatrix's life again. He just happens to be in Europe because he's going on a trip with his buddy. He and Beatrix reunite. He tells her all about his wife and his kid on the way, and they proceed to have sex together twice. And all William can think about the entire time he's with Bea is how much he wants to be inside of Bea. Gross. He's married. Did I mention that? That he's married? That he's married? That he has a baby on the way? And William never gets caught, because surprise, he also dies. Not of a heart attack, but in a car crash. After this death, I'm like, why did we set this novel in World War II if we're having really ordinary deaths? The war has nothing to do with this novel. It's just set dressing, and it's not even good. This is like kindergarten Christmas concert kind of set dressing. Just stick a snowflake on the risers and call it a day kind of bad. William's funeral is a point of problem, because Rose's family's Catholic and they want William to have a Catholic funeral and be buried in a Catholic church cemetery, while Nancy wants William to have a Protestant funeral and be buried next to his father. The consensus is that Rose gets priority because she's the wife, and the only reason I call bullshit on this is because William doesn't even like her, and I'm surprised Rose doesn't bring this up to just defer to Nancy. It is no secret to Rose that clearly William feels no spark about her beyond the occasional sex they have on the days they intentionally spend away with each other. So I don't really know why we defer to Rose when it seems to matter so much to Nancy. I don't think a mother should ever have to bury her child, but I do think she does, get a say if it happens, and maybe more of a say if it's really clear that her son does not even like his own wife. I also think it's weird to give a Catholic funeral to someone who isn't Catholic and have him buried in a Catholic cemetery unless this was expressly agreed upon. Religion as culture, and Catholics allow non-Catholic individuals to be in their cemeteries to keep families together. I don't know if William agreed to this with Rose, and I feel like that's something the spouse should know. If it mattered to Nancy to have her whole family buried together, I would think it would have come up in conversation. Unless William agreed to it, it just feels disrespectful of his own spirituality or lack thereof. I also don't know why we made Rose Catholic and made this plot point to begin with. Is this supposed to be just another thing that puts her and William at odds? It just feels like this was added to add some pages of tension that I don't know how to feel about. Why not just cut this out and have him buried by his dad? What does this really add to the story? I think maybe it gives Rose a greater presence in the story, but the problem with her plot relevance is that she exists as a roadblock that makes William and Beatrix doomed lovers never to be together. She feels intentionally designed to be a contrarian to everything about William, even going so far as to hate the house on Maine. These two people have nothing in common and don't like each other, and I don't know how they got married in the first place. But, the hole left by William's death gives Gerald away into Beatrix's life so they can fuck. He does find out that Bea and William cheated on Rose, and at this point, I think Rose is the only person who does not know, and it's just, I feel so bad for Rose. She didn't deserve any of this. And then our novel ends and they get married, they realize they failed so hard out on love because they were, meant for each other, or something stupid like that. Millie has another wedding that we literally skip. Beatrix invites Gerald to it, and we cut directly after, because I guess it's way more important that we just sit around and talk with our thumbs in our pockets than actually have people doing something insane. That's all the important stuff that happens, I guess. I think I'm mostly disappointed by all the banal deaths and just the really patchy storytelling that makes it feel so clunkily pushing us to the end goal of Beatrix and Gerald. Oh my god, did you think we were done talking about the surface level world building in this novel? I am not done yet. Sit back down. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Erin, what fucking world building? It's Earth! That's pre-built! I don't know what other term to use, I'll be honest. So, even when the setting is Earth, you still have to build the world of Earth. You have to make the setting believable. And the cool thing about doing it on Earth is that it's all done for you. All you have to do is research it. It is an open book test, and people still fail. I am so sorry, Laura Spence Ash, that I am clowning on you so hard. But girl, the world is badly written. I don't think you did a good job. And it sucks more because this whole book hinges on the idea that it is about the separate worlds of England and America. So let's start with the anachronisms. Anachronisms are when something doesn't feel accurate to the time the story is written in. An iPhone in ancient Egypt would be an anachronism. A teenager in 1960 saying that something is on fleek is also an anachronism. The most common time we see this is in language and inventions. Basically, historical inaccuracy when the inaccuracy is because the thing in question is from a different time period. The major anachronism of this book is how modern the dialogue is around female higher education. The right to education for women in the United States didn't happen until I believe the 80s, and while there were female higher education institutions before that, a woman going to college in the 40s wasn't so casual in the way that it is talked about today. Nancy makes it seem like it's wrong that Bea doesn't go to college when Bea maintains that her family has never gone into higher education and it's not her path. And William makes it seem like she's throwing her life away, but in his imagination, he and her go to Harvard. But Harvard was not accepting female students at this time. 1940 is a very unique time period for women as they begin to enter the workforce and higher education in higher numbers, which then goes on to normalize it by the time we hit the 70s and 80s, prompting acceptance and laws that promote the right to work and higher education. Remember that this is the era of the stereotypical 50s housewife. Do you think the matron of the home, wife and mother, also got a college degree? So what does this novel have in terms of world building, right? What do the two worlds of England and America look like? In America, we get Christmas and Thanksgiving at a private island off the coast of Maine, and the latter of these things is not an American thing, but a rich person thing. I hate how the Gregorys keep saying they're not rich when they literally own a private island. They end up selling it to fund Gerald's college education, which is insane because it comes with the implication that they did not financially plan for that and only planned for Williams. England, we know less of. We get a window into London during the air raids. Bea's father becomes an air raid precaution warden, or the ARP. That's pretty cool, but, again, we already know. We don't actually learn about anything about the ARP. It's just there. I've brought this term up a couple of times, but for those who don't know or are not American, the American Homefront, or the Homefront, is the term Americans use when describing the war efforts that took place inside of the United States. I'm just unsure if this term was used in other countries, like the Irish Homefront, so I'm just covering my bases just in case. The Homefront includes everything citizens did to help the war effort, from the people working in the factories to produce military supplies, foster families taking in children from Europe while the war rages, accepting rations and war bonds, and even the All-American Girl Baseball League. It was probably called the Homefront as a political marketing tactic to make women and ineligible men feel like they were also participating in the war by having their own front to fight. And color me surprised when this term does not show up in the novel. There are also no war bonds, which I believe would have been called the defense bonds in America. There's no rations, no baseball. The All-American Girls Baseball League only traveled the Midwest because all the teams were from the Midwest. However, they were also on the radio. And this baseball league had big advertising money. Philip Wrigley founded the league. Wrigley, as in Wrigley Field, the home stadium of the Chicago Cubs. So, this was not just a Midwestern fling. It was a national, cultural moment, and you're telling me, in a book that takes place during the American Homefront, that is supposed to be about the different walks of life that Bea lives, that we can't even spare a sentence about the nationally known All-American Girls Baseball League? You're really gonna do that to my Racing Bells? You're really gonna diss my Kenosha Comets? You dare ignore the motherfucking Rockford Peaches? Get out of town! We do get a snippet of Miss G doing something for the war effort, but it's really vague, and I'm gonna be honest, really unmemorable. I remember Bea's dad joins the ARP. I know her mom drives an ambulance. William becomes a watchman for the air raids at his school, but we already know that's not really believable. Because you expect me to believe that the city of Boston decided a 16-year-old on a rooftop could easily identify the difference between a German, Japanese, American, and a British plane? Anyways, I remember all of that, but I just don't remember what Miss G did, so I gotta assume it's socks or blankets or something that was Red Crosses. Maybe that's my best guess. That's the only other thing that we see. And again, these moments are very small and isolated, and it just doesn't feel like it's impacting the story. And it's just so frustrating because there's all of this wildly available lore on the American Homefront, but none of it is used. We don't need to bring up baseball. I'm not really adamant about the baseball. I just need something. Anything about the American Homefront efforts to be here and have it take front and center. Yes, Miss G taking in B is a part of the American Homefront, but this isn't a plotline that's sustainable without the narrative of Bea's culture shock and adaptation into American life, because fostering is not a unique thing to this time period. For Bea to have culture shock, she has to encounter the culture, which we simply do not have. In the movie Molly, an American Girl on the Homefront, we see her dad leave because he's going to be a military doctor in Europe. We see her foster a British girl who's escaping the air raids of London. There's a scene where Molly's worried because her mom is stressed about bills, and her friends say that bills aren't a mother's job. Do you know how much history is in that sentence right there? Molly's mother gets her job, and her kids are shocked that she's going to work on a fighter plane assembly line. Molly really struggles to adapt in this new way of life and doesn't want anything to change, and we can see why, because it's everywhere, all around her, all the time in the writing. And you might be wondering, did I rewatch Molly, an American Girl on the Homefront, to prove this point? No! I clicked on the movie and ran it a couple of different places, and every scene had something about it, because it's the Homefront. They're living in it. There's no baseball mentioned in the movie, but like I said, this is not really about the baseball to me. I just think if we're writing a book about American culture during the Homefront, then maybe the All-American Girl Baseball League is really low-hanging fruit. I hate to say this, but this book feels like a middle-class person was asked to write about World War II from memory. There's no poverty, segregation, baseball, there's no factories, nothing about the working class, there's nothing about detainment camps, or the Red Cross, or the Donut Dollies, or the American Legion, or defense bombs, or propaganda. This book is trips to private islands, and at most ARP, ambulance driving, and Miss G's doing something vaguely for the war effort that's not even memorable. Was her husband in the age bracket to be drafted? I don't know. The book didn't mention it. Wouldn't it have been cooler if he got drafted or labeled ineligible? There's just so much we could have done here, but sorry, no, we need to properly set up that Bea's gonna fuck both her foster brothers during the length of the story. That is way more important than baseball. Or the war. That too, I guess. Tone deaf, I suppose, is the word I'm looking for. It reminds me of this book called Elle s'appelle Sarah, or its inferior English title, Sarah's Key, which is a fictional story that discusses the Valdiv roundup in France, where French cops rounded up a bunch of Jewish families in Paris and shipped them to concentration camps. And in the modern day timeline of this book, the main character, protagonist, is searching for the story of this Jewish girl named Sarah. The main character has a baby, and the baby, she names it Sarah, and it's weird. And then the main character ends up being romantic with one of Sarah's descendants, and that's weirder. That's the kind of weird I feel about the tone deafness of this story. It's a romantic idea of what the war was like, where nobody got drafted, and no one important of the story died in any gruesome way as a result of the war, and it didn't really affect the plot at all, except for it to be the inciting incident and a midpoint shift. That's the only reason why the war is important, and I don't like that. It just makes me feel gross. So what's this novel about? Despite what promises we were given in the premise, this is not about Bea and the two worlds she's caught between, because we've already established that this book lacks any concrete information about the American home front or anything distinct about post-World War II Britain. Beatrix brings up the new construction of buildings after the bombings, but there's nothing about the brutalist architecture, which was all of the rage post-World War II, though it was a short-lived movement. Free healthcare in Britain was a project that was launched in the aftermath of World War II. How about the fact that India and Pakistan were decolonized by England in 1947? I spent 20 minutes on the internet just looking up stuff that happened to England after World War II. Like, it's actually not that hard. So this novel isn't about that. There's just not enough detail about either country. I think this book wants to be about family and the way it shatters and brings itself back together again, but I'm not very confident on the novel's success of doing that, because we don't get the scene where Bea returns to England and it's just her mom. Bea doesn't feel the loss of her father in the place where he is supposed to be, nor do we get anything about how she feels of Millie's various husbands when those husbands are in front of Bea. I think Bea adapting into her new family when she went to America was done pretty well, but that's about all this novel does well. So it's not about the two worlds, and it's not really about this strange situation of the two shattered families coming together and breaking apart. This novel is about Beatrix and her romantic endeavors with both of her foster brothers. It's about her and William, and when he dies, it's about her and Gerald. I think you could classify this novel as a taboo romance with historical fiction elements. The historical fiction elements really only serve the purpose of giving us a plausible reason why Beatrix ends up in the lives of an American family and then why she leaves them. Now, is it unethical to want to fuck your foster brother? That's the question we're asking. So, I grew up in a house that had a bunch of strays. My brother's friends, my cousin lived with us for a while, and he had a bunch of friends that lived and hung out there. I have anywhere between 2 and 10 brothers, because these boys were such a common sight in my house, and they felt like siblings. I've also been in the foster system, and I have foster siblings, so I think I am a credible source when I say that this dynamic between Beatrix and William and Gerald is taboo. It's like dating a step-sibling. And look, I understand that there is a market for taboo romances, and I think if you like reading about it, then I'm glad there's a market for it. But let's not pretend this isn't weird. Let's not pretend that this is not a taboo romance. It is. It's weird. I think I'm also disappointed because having a sibling dynamic with someone who's not even related to you is dynamic and interesting. My cousin's friend, the one that lived with us, ended up being a jackass, and I find it difficult to deal with because my cousin saw that guy as a friend, and that's easy to cut off, right? It's just some guy you knew, but I saw him as a brother, so our relationship dynamic is entirely different. Not everything has to be about romance. I really liked Beatrix and William and Gerald as siblings, and the sharp turn into romance felt unoriginal and predictable. Like, of course they're gonna fuck, because it's a girl and a boy who hang out together, and when girl-boy hang out together, it means one day they fall in love, because that's the only relationship dynamic to ever exist, ever. And you can tell the writing is leading to that, because there's, like, all these minor character lovers that don't survive past a handful of scenes, and it just feels like a waste of space, because you know that it's leading to Beatrix and Gerald once William is killed. Conclusion. So it's clear I didn't like this novel, despite the praise this novel receives. It feels like a lit fic writer tried to write historical fiction and ended up with historical fiction infused taboo romance. The characterization is great. We have a vivid cast of complicated characters. My favorite is Millie. I don't think that's a surprise. I love Millie. But this is the selling point of the novel, the characters. Everything else in this novel suffers. The structure is inconsistent, the time jumps are jarring, and it makes it clear the only relevant information of the story is Beatrix and the Gregorys, and every scene after her return from London is the avenue to get her back to them. America and England are surface level and dull, with nothing really grounding us in these locations during and post World War II. We get a few bits with London, which only serves the purpose of how Reginald hates his wife, and some bits in America that are just inaccurate and very probably insulting to the real civilians who participated in the AWS. This novel also doesn't really have anything to say because of this. We're not getting a window into the American Homefront or London post-World War II, nor did we focus on what the first half of the book was building up to, Bea's return to London, and how lost at sea she must feel because of it. All that seemed to matter was getting Beatrix and Gerald together, and it makes for a story that doesn't seem to mean anything at all. This book also runs into some ethical problems with the romanticization of the American Homefront, erasing the entire demographic of Black Americans in this time period. Despite that there are literal air raids going on in a portion of this book, there is just a distinct lack of danger or any real tangibility of the efforts made by citizens during this time period. And I feel if the author had done some research into the American Homefront and post-World War II England, this could have been more vivid, and there might have been more interesting plot threads that you could have invested in that directly correlate to the citizens' participation in World War II and how World War II impacted citizens. For example, during the Dunkirk evacuation, about 850 privately owned sea vessels were manned by civilians and sent to aid military ships to evacuate soldiers from the beaches of Dunkirk. Why not have Reginald and Millie own a boat that was pressed into service, or have one of them volunteer to sail? Why not focus more on Reginald in the ARP or Millie during the ambulance and pull away from it only being relevant when he hates his wife? Ethan Gregory could have gotten drafted or deemed ineligible to fight. William could have lied about his age to join the army. Nancy could have joined the workforce. We could have centered World War II more, and because we don't, I fear this novel did not need to be about World War II. You could have told a very similar story without the war. How can we write about how World War II affects characters when it doesn't really seem to affect them at all, except for Millie? I think the lesson to take away from this novel is that good characters can be enough for some readers, but it is not enough for me. The world is flat and surface level, so there's nothing really to give it color. We have these great characters, which for the most part have good interpersonal drama, except for that random bout of infidelity, but there's nothing for them to do except talk to each other. So what do we, as historical fiction writers, do? How do we make sure that our representation of an era isn't flat like this book Beyond That the Sea? How do we make sure that it feels like there's a war going on for the entire cast and not just Millie? First, you have to research your historical fiction era. In the course of this episode, I have covered so many different parts of World War II, and I happen to know most of this stuff because I think World War II is really interesting. I've created on-the-fly plot elements that make the war feel more real for the entire cast. As a writer, you don't have to be perfect in your research, but you have to know enough to make your audience believe the world you're writing in. And that takes time and research and effort. It's not just enough to, name organizations, but, we have to see the world directly affect the action of the plot. We saw this with Reginald and how him in the IRP is less about the war and more about his characterization. It serves as a way for him to avoid his wife. We don't actually learn anything about the organization. Beatrix in America is the strongest part of the novel because that's where the war directly affects the plot. She's fostered by an American family. But after that, it's like the war vanishes because we're missing the entirety of the American Homefront. The second thing we have to do is not erase the ugly parts of any given time period. As I said in the genre section, it feels like Black people don't exist in this novel, and I really don't like that. But their inclusion doesn't have to be about suffering either. So, this is what I think Spence Ash could have done to include the Black community in a way that highlighted Black joy over Black suffering, despite the fact that this is an era of segregation. You might have thought we were done talking about baseball, but oh boy are we not. Sit back down. I think the Gregory's favorite baseball team could have been from, and this is the real name of the association, the Negro League. Their favorite team is the Kansas City Monarchs. Then, because this novel goes up to the 60s, in 1947 we could have seen the Gregorys become fans of the Dodgers because Jackie Robinson was on the Monarchs, but in 1947 went to go play for the Dodgers. And maybe it becomes a thing that they try to go to some of his games, and maybe it's Ethan who's a really big fan, and after he dies it becomes a family tradition to try and at least go to a Dodger game and a Monarch game a year. We solve several problems this book has. Black people now exist. There's something concrete about the American Homefront represented. Ethan has more dynamic characterization, and we give his death a little more gravity. And there's something to do more than just sit around and talk about events. We can actually go to a baseball game. this novel could have been saved by baseball. Like, the only time it comes up is when Bee says her favorite team is the Red Sox, which isn't even interesting because they're foster families in Boston. Like, of course she likes the Red Sox. I need her to like a team that's nowhere near Boston, right? My aunt doesn't live in Illinois, but she loves the Cubs. She's probably the only person within 500 miles of her city who does. There are entire states and rivers between her and the Cubs, but that's her team. She's got a tattoo when they won the World Series. Like, nobody loves the Cubs more than my aunt. That's interesting. In real life, having state pride and just liking the team that is your state's team is fine. It doesn't have to be that deep. I like the Brewers because I'm from Wisconsin. But from a writing standpoint, it's just not interesting because there's nowhere to go with it. Like, oh yeah, I'm up north in Wisconsin. I sure do love the Packers. Like, of course you do. The whole goddamn state would be painted green and gold if it could. Make them a Bears fan in southeastern Wisconsin and just watch them try to navigate the sports equivalent of enemy territory that is only rivaled with the Toledo Strip. Again, I am not the person to talk about how to write Black history in this novel. The most I can say is that I don't like the fact that it feels like Black people don't exist at all in this book, and I think there are ways to include them in a way that isn't about suffering. There are so many free resources on the internet on how to write minority characters, and a lot of good advocates who want to steer you on the right path. You just need to seek them out. I also recommend reading Black literature written by Black authors. Literature is a major staple of culture, and you can learn a lot by reading a culture's literature. I think it's important to understand how a culture chooses to represent itself compared to how people outside the culture do. Some books I really like by Black authors are Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo, The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Disha Philia, Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah, House of Cotton by Monica Brashears, and The House of Eve by Sadeka Johnson. Again, if you want to know about the history and nuance of, like, the othering of Catholics in Christian communities and the very specific time period of mostly Irish American Catholics as second-class citizens in the historical United States, I can tell you about that, but that's all I got. So to summarize, do your research. That's it. I'm just so shocked at how little research went into this novel. It is astounding. Our writing exercise today is to write a short story about your country's home front during the World War II, or if you want, you can write about the American home front. It's not like I'm checking your work anyways. The home front, regardless of what country, is not monolithic. In this episode, I've talked about everything from war bonds to baseball. Something to keep in mind is that you should have multiple aspects coming into contact with each other to create the vivid environment of the home front. In the movie Molly, An American Girl on the Home Front, we see enlistment, women in the workforce, the shock of that, fostering British children, death notices, MIA notices, scrap metal collections, Red Cross care packages, the struggle of adapting to be in a country at war, and all of this is centered on very ordinary events like spelling bees and tap dance performances. I find Molly's movie comparable to Beyond That the Sea because they're both stories taking place on the home front, but they have plots that exist outside the war, but the war is supposed to be shaping the narrative. And while it does do that for Molly's movie, it does not for Beyond That the Sea. Molly's normal activities are constantly interrupted by the effects of the war, whereas we don't see that in Beyond That the Sea. So yes, while it's important to narrow your focus in a short story, you should also be aware of some other aspects of the home front that might impact the world building. You can just write about the All-American Girl Baseball League, but that involves knowing about the draft and the men who volunteered and the men who couldn't, as well as knowing about the technology available that helped advertise to get viewers for baseball and the founding of the league and so on and so forth. Once you pick a starting point, it is really easy to see how all of these other parts of the home front connect to it, creating this dynamic cultural moment. Art is subjective, and attempting to assert any form of objectivity onto art is a waste of time. You can't even say that good grammar is an objective must-have because there are genres where fragmentation is important and there is an audience for those genres. I think everyone wants high-quality novels, we just have drastically different thresholds of what we consider high quality. So whether you loved or hated Beyond That the Sea, let me know in the comments because I'd love to hear your thoughts and theories. What is your favorite aspect of the home front during World War II? If you couldn't tell, I really like the American Girl Baseball League. The madness is ended, my friends, and you can go in peace.